a humid August night in 2008, while the world's attention was fixated on the opening ceremony of the Beijing Olympics, artillery shells lit up the sky over South Ossetia. In the coming days, Russian tanks rolled through the Roki Tunnel, Georgian troops fought to hold ground, and the international community scrambled to grasp what was happening. In just 5 days, the conflict had begun and effectively ended, leaving behind hundreds of casualties, thousands of displaced civilians, and an international order shaken. The Russo-Georgian War, often dismissed as a regional flare-up, was in fact a turning point in Vladimir Putin's grand strategy, marking a departure from post-Soviet ambiguity toward open confrontation and assertive revisionism. This article explores the lead-up to war, the unfolding of events, and most importantly, how this short but consequential war reshaped Russia's foreign policy, military doctrine, and global posture, foreshadowing everything from Crimea to Syria and beyond. Chapter 1. Frozen conflicts and smoldering borders. The collapse of the Soviet Union and the birth of tensions. The seeds of the 2008 war were sown in the chaotic aftermath of the Soviet Union's collapse. Georgia, a newly independent state, faced internal disintegration as regions like South Ossetia and Abkhazia broke away with Russian backing. By the early 1990s, brutal conflicts had erupted, leaving behind two frozen fronts, nominally part of Georgia, but functionally controlled by separatist regimes and Russian peacekeepers. Despite these unresolved tensions, the international community largely looked away. The frozen conflicts became geopolitical blind spots. Putin's rise and the shift from chaos to control. When Vladimir Putin assumed power in 2000, his mandate was to restore Russia's strength. The Kremlin's approach to the post-Soviet space became increasingly guided by a belief that Western influence, particularly NATO and EU expansion, was a direct threat to Russian interests. Georgia, under its young, pro-Western president Mikhail Saakashvili, symbolized everything the Kremlin feared: NATO ambitions, liberal reforms, and defiance of Moscow's orbit. From 2004 onward, tensions escalated. Saakashvili attempted to reassert control over breakaway regions, leading to minor skirmishes and increasing Russian military presence. Meanwhile, Moscow distributed Russian passports to South Ossetians and Abkhazians, a strategy that would later form the pretext for protecting Russian citizens. Chapter 2. From Flashpoints to Fire. April-July 2008, Provocations and Paranoia. In April 2008, NATO declared that Georgia and Ukraine would eventually become members. Though no timeline was set, it was enough to enrage the Kremlin. Russia responded by establishing direct diplomatic ties with Abkhazia and South Ossetia, an implicit recognition of their autonomy, and increased troop deployments in the regions under the guise of peacekeeping. Skirmishes became more frequent. In July, Russian warplanes entered Georgian airspace. On the ground, both sides accused each other of provocations, sabotage, and minor incursions. August 7 to 8, the invasion begins. On the night of August 7th, Georgia launched a military offensive into Tskinvali, the capital of South Ossetia, claiming it was responding to shelling from separatist forces. Saakashvili framed the operation as a necessary act to restore order. The Kremlin responded almost instantly. Russian forces, long pre-positioned for just such a moment, surged through the Roki Tunnel, launching a full-scale counteroffensive. Tanks, artillery, and air power devastated Georgian positions. By the morning of August 8th, it was no longer a regional flare-up, it was war. Chapter 3. The 5-Day War. August 8 to 10, Russia strikes back. Russian airstrikes hit not just military targets, but Georgian towns and infrastructure. The speed and intensity of the response shocked Georgia and international observers. It was clear that Moscow had anticipated a conflict and prepared a rapid domination strategy. In Abkhazia, separatist forces launched an offensive against Georgian troops in the Kodori Gorge. A second front had opened. Georgian forces, overwhelmed and fragmented, began to withdraw. By August 10th, Russian troops were deep inside Georgia, far beyond the conflict zones. The cities of Gori and Zugdidi were within striking distance. August 11-12, the ceasefire international pressure mounted. French President Nicolas Sarkozy, then holding the EU presidency, brokered a 6-point ceasefire plan. By August 12th, President Dmitry Medvedev announced the end of military operations. Russian forces, however, remained in place and continued to conduct security operations. the war was over. Politically, it had just begun. Chapter 4. The Aftermath. Casualties and consequences. Civilian and military losses. Estimates suggest over 850 killed, including civilians and soldiers from both sides. Tens of thousands were displaced. Infrastructure damage. Georgian military installations and civilian infrastructure suffered extensive damage. Territorial outcome. Russia recognized South Ossetia and Abkhazia as independent states, a move condemned by nearly all other nations. Geopolitical shockwaves. The West, though rhetorically supportive of Georgia, offered little beyond condemnation and limited humanitarian aid. NATO's enlargement plans stalled. The message was clear: Georgia was on its own. For Russia, the operation was a success on multiple levels. It asserted dominance in the Caucasus. It exposed Western reluctance to intervene. It tested and refined Russia's new, fast mobilization military doctrine. Chapter 5. Putin's new strategy. Though Dmitry Medvedev was president during the war, Vladimir Putin was calling the shots, literally. According to reports, Putin was in Beijing during the opening ceremony, but immediately returned to oversee operations. The war revealed a shift in Russia's strategic calculus. 1. Preemptive intervention as doctrine. The idea that Russia could use force outside its borders to protect Russian citizens became part of official doctrine. This principle would be invoked again in Crimea, 2014, and eastern Ukraine, and echoed in Kazakhstan, 2022. 2. Hybrid warfare foundations. While the 2008 war was largely conventional, it laid the groundwork for non-linear or hybrid warfare. Information operations flooded media with conflicting narratives. Cyber attacks hit Georgian websites. Russian-backed militias served as irregular forces. These tactics would be perfected later in Ukraine and Syria. 3. NATO's hesitation as opportunity. The weak response from NATO emboldened the Kremlin. If Georgia, a NATO aspirant, could be attacked without consequence, the risk calculus for future aggression changed dramatically. Saakashvili's decision to engage in South Ossetia remains controversial. Critics argue he walked into a trap. Supporters claim he had little choice as provocations escalated. Either way, Georgia's NATO ambitions were derailed. Domestically, the war caused political fallout, but also galvanized efforts to modernize the military, improve cybersecurity, and deepen ties with the EU. Despite clear signs of Russian escalation, the West failed to deter aggression or respond decisively. The conflict revealed lack of contingency planning for post-Soviet conflicts, over-reliance on diplomacy with no enforcement mechanism, a deep misunderstanding of Putin's worldview. Chapter 7. Echoes in Ukraine and beyond. The playbook established in Georgia became the blueprint for Crimea and Donbass. From passport distribution in Crimea, to information dominance, to ambiguous warfare and deniability, and rapid deployment and propaganda narratives, it was all tested first in Georgia, Syria, and the global pivot. When Russia intervened in Syria in 2015, it did so with the confidence gained from Georgia. The military reforms post-2008 enabled rapid expeditionary warfare, airbase establishment, and precision strikes. Chapter 8. Rewriting the rules of engagement. The war also altered the global understanding of post-Cold War security norms. It shattered assumptions that major wars in Europe were obsolete. It exposed the fragility of international law in deterring aggression. It emphasized the growing role of gray zone conflict, where lines between war and peace are blurred. Putin understood something his Western counterparts had not fully grasped. Power projection does not need to follow Western rules. In hindsight, the Russo-Georgian War was not an anomaly. It was a warning. A warning of a Russia willing to use military force for geopolitical gain. A Russia unconstrained by the liberal order. A Russia preparing for confrontation, not cooperation. And yet, for years, that warning was ignored. Timeline. Key events. April 2008. NATO Bucharest Summit. Georgia promised future membership. July 2008. Skirmishes intensify in South Ossetia. August 7-8. Georgia attacks Tskhinvali. Russia invades August 10. Russian troops advance into Georgia proper. August 12. Ceasefire agreement brokered. August 26. Russia recognizes Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Postscript. Lessons unlearned. As of today, Russian troops remain in Abkhazia and South Ossetia, both declared independent but economically and militarily dependent on Moscow. Georgia remains outside NATO. The conflict is not frozen, it is unresolved. The West's failure to respond decisively in 2008 allowed the dominoes to fall. Ukraine, Syria, Belarus, and even Central Asia bear the fingerprints of the strategic pivot that began with Georgia. The 2008 war, short as it was, marked the beginning of a new era. An era shaped not by diplomacy and integration, but by spheres of influence, controlled narratives, and hard power.